The situation on the front has deteriorated significantly in the past week. That's a Russian perspective, as we now have reports that their soldiers in Kupyansk are cut off and surrounded, with another Russian reporter saying they're scattered in small groups of 2 or 3 and, quote, their prospects are, to put it mildly, dire. Now, there's been a few rather significant changes on the battlefield in recent days, with both Russia and Ukraine gaining the upper hand in different directions, which lines up well with what a Ukrainian corps commander said a few days ago, that for the first time since the war began, the Russian military is losing more people than they're bringing in. Now, I hope everyone had a nice Christmas, had a chance to sit back, relax, and celebrate with family and friends. I don't mean to brag, but my daughter gave me some of her old toys and a rock wrapped up and everything. Good luck topping that one. But let's get into what we know. Starting with Kupyansk, I'm going to turn to a map here, deep state map, to give you an idea of where this is located on the battlefield. Northern area here. And this is a location that Putin, about 5 weeks ago now, said that was completely under the control of Russian forces. And it's been a flashpoint in the last 1 to 2 weeks as we've seen a Ukrainian counterattack push in and surround the Russian forces that remain in Kupyansk. And the big drama, if you will, inside of kind of the Russian reporter community is a number of their analysts had been saying for a while just what Putin was, that they clearly held this territory, with others sounding the alarm for 3-4 months at this point, that situation was very unstable. Russian media Rybar says the situation in the Kupyansk direction remains extremely tense. Massive territorial losses were revealed, occurring due to systematic submission of false reports that exaggerated Russian armed forces' successes. Mill blogger Filatov says now this encirclement consists of groups of 2 to 3 fighters, divided among themselves, and their prospects are, to put it mildly, dire. And Filatov has shared direct communication with some of those soldiers that are cut off in Kupyansk, saying they could sure use some more ammunition, but saying that their defensive positions and their strong points are rather well fortified. Alexander Kotz, another Russian analyst here, said the situation when the enemy launches counteroffensive operations in a war is a natural process. It would be strange if he didn't do it. And there have been many such cases during this war. A bit of a stretch to refer to what happened in Kupyansk as a counteroffensive. We're going to hear that term here in a moment from a Ukrainian-aligned source. Counterattack is much more appropriate in this case, where we saw a couple Ukrainian brigades utilized in, again, a relatively small portion of the front. This is focused on cutting off Kupyansk to the north and clearing the city of the Russian attackers. Kotz continued by saying there's no complete control of the city by either side. The numerical advantage is now seriously on the side of the enemy, as in the Ukrainian forces. Military informant said while on domestic channels the anti-crisis measures were being spread about the fake Zelensky video, the Russian positions in the city were being lost one by one. The breakthrough in Kupyansk did not happen suddenly. The first prerequisites for this were laid in the middle of summer 2025 and only strengthened throughout the autumn due to the succession of false reports. And this has been an interesting one because there were a number of accounts, both on the Ukrainian and Russian side, going back 3-4 plus months, saying the situation in Kupyansk is not how it's being presented. And it looks like nobody on the Russian side really listened to that. In fact, we have some Russian analysts still that, despite that evidence mounting in recent months, are kind of holding firm that was never the case, that it's even being exaggerated now, with kind of the stance generally being, Alexander Kotz, counteroffensives happen. That's not, or the fact that Kupyansk doesn't matter, kind of the two mechanisms that Russian analysts are going with right now. Counteroffensives, counterattacks do happen. That's not the big story around Kupyansk, however. The story here is, one, that it was exaggerated claims by the Russian military all the way up to Putin speaking to an international audience saying that they had this territory. But more nuanced than that is that Ukraine is still able to carry out this type of operation 4 years into the war. In fact, turning to Yaroslav Trifimov, probably got that wrong, the foreign affairs correspondent for the Wall Street Journal talked about this just yesterday, about why Kupyansk is important. He said, after 2 years of slow but continuous retreats, the Ukrainian armed forces have demonstrated that they've retained the capacity for a large, sustained counteroffensive. Again, my personal note there is I would refer to this as a counterattack. And that territorial losses in Russia are not forever. This undercuts the argument that Kyiv should sign a bad deal immediately because the deal on the table in the future will be even worse. He says, does this mean that the trend of the overall war has reversed? No. Russia is still advancing, albeit slowly, in other axes such as Huliapole and Zaporizhzhia, an area where current front lines are supposed to be frozen once the Witkov-Dmitriev plan is agreed. But Kupyansk shows that Ukraine is not about to collapse and that it has cards to play and surprises still up its sleeve. In fact, those Russian advances in the Zaporizhzhia direction is something we're going to get into today, but I think he drives home an important point here, that Ukraine does still retain the capacity and the capabilities and the means to carry out counterattack operations to seize territory back from Russia at this point in the war. Now, before getting into some of these other assessments, a quick update on a fundraiser. We hit the $50,000 goal on Christmas. How about that? How cool is that? We're picking up some thermal drones for Chaos Company of the 2nd Mechanized Battalion, 3rd Assault Brigade, fighting in the Le Mans direction. These guys, the fog is intense in that area. We've seen that Russia's been able to advance when those foggy conditions persist. The thermal drones help them see through that. So these are reconnaissance drones we're helping them pick up. We set the initial goal at 50,000 because these guys asked for 10 to 15, and 50,000 gets us about 10 to 12 drones. We've since increased that to 60 because we hit the goal, and we're going to run this through the end of the year. So the reason specifically through the 31st is the organization we're doing this with, Ukraine Aid Operations, is a registered 501c3 nonprofit. So every one of your donations here is fully tax deductible. So if you're trying to reduce that tax bill right at the end of the year, incredible cause here to put that towards. Now, any donors that give $250 and above get this pretty unique Chaos patch. Again, this is the company, the drone company that we are supporting in eastern Ukraine, part of the 3rd Assault Brigade. Now, stick around to the end of today's video. We've got a couple delivery videos and some commentary from units that we recently supported with trucks. I played those in the last video we published, but for anybody who hasn't seen them, really cool to see what your donations have gone to immediate support on the front lines. Now, shifting back, there was an interesting interview with Andrei Belitsky, the commander of the Ukrainian 3rd Army Corps, so previously 3rd Assault Brigade, that expanded is now the 3rd Army Corps, and he did an interview where he presented kind of an idea here that isn't getting maybe enough attention as I think it should. It's the idea that Russia is running out of steam. They can't do this forever. And I'm hesitant to present this type of information because I'm sure at this point everybody has seen folks in every direction kind of overplay and sensationalize some of these claims that, I mean, right at the beginning of the war, right, we had that Russia was falling apart. 2 days in, it was the Russian military is collapsing, and clearly that didn't happen, or they ran out of missiles. And conversely, we've been hearing every week for 4 years that the Ukrainian lines are on the verge of collapse. So that I try to stay away from that, to be blunt. But the presentation here, I think, makes sense because the longer this goes on, and we've talked about this before when looking at different situations along the front, is slow progress can turn into rapid gains, as in you chip away, and at some point, the lines very well could break. That goes both ways. The Russian military is not infinite in terms of their resources and their manpower, and they are taking significant losses. We haven't yet, and I've personally been surprised, and I think a lot of people have been as well, at the losses that Russia is accepting in terms of taking some of this territory and at the pace that they're moving. But we should not assume that that is a forever trade they're willing to make. Belitsky here said, quote, "For the first time in a long period, the reinforcement of personnel in the Russian armed forces does not outweigh the losses. We and the Russians are like boxers in the 12th round. We think about our condition and exhaustion like I'm going to collapse now and that's it. But I think the Russians are more or less in the same condition." I think that boxing analogy is perfect. I hear that often used when discussing World War I, especially from 1916 on, where the two sides were just on the brink of collapse, and it was just a matter of one big knockout blow probably could bring about the end of the war. I don't know what that knockout blow would be here. I don't think that at this point in the conflict is ridiculous to think about. It very well might be in the cards. He says the Russians have a catastrophic situation in all types of weapons, armored vehicles, artillery systems, etc. We are seeing that. I mean, I'll play some footage right now showing some of the recent vehicles that Russia is putting together to assault positions towards the front. If they had enough infantry fighting vehicles and armored personnel carriers for every one of their soldiers to do it, they would. I got it. Those are expensive, and they would rather lose a pickup truck than an IFV. But if you had these supplies to do that, you of course want your soldiers better protected with firepower moving towards the front. This doesn't mean that Russia is out of tanks or out of infantry fighting vehicles, but we have to recognize that their stocks have been depleted. How long can this go on? Another 6 months, 18 months, 36 months? I don't know, but Bliski has a good point that it can't go on like this forever. And look, no doubt, Ukraine has their challenges as well. The big benefit at this point is Ukraine is becoming increasingly reliant on drones that are domestically manufactured to stop the Russians that are advancing. The Russians are having to get out of their positions and traverse open terrain in some of these vehicles, leading to significant losses. He says, yes, Ukraine has had setbacks. There have been retreats, of course. But how reasonable is the price for this for the Russians? They're running out of steam. The quality of personnel has long been extremely poor, but combat training is also objectively deteriorating with each passing month. Again, I think they raise a really good point. I wouldn't take this article to say that Russia is on the verge of collapse or on the verge of defeat. Just all of the things that are presented to Ukraine's detriment. They're short on manpower. They don't have the industrial base that Russia does. That is the same on both sides here, right? There is a point where this becomes unsustainable for Russia, and I would have to imagine the longer this drags on at this current pace, the closer and closer we get to that. Now, shifting back to the map here, we've seen a couple different Russian advances in recent days. Again, kind of a push and pull in a couple different directions. So moving south to the Seversk area, where we saw Russia take a chunk of territory just this last week. In fact, the Ukrainian General Staff confirmed this as well, saying that Seversk had fallen. We've got that highlighted here in the center of the map. ISW, when I presented this a couple days ago, I didn't have much of an assessment in terms of what this means now or going forward. Institute for the Study of War, I think, put together a pretty solid assessment of what to expect here. And we'll zoom out just a little bit because the area they're talking about is not just Seversk, but what this means going forward, specifically towards Slovyansk in the west. ISW says the Russian efforts in the Seversk direction have been extremely lengthy, especially given that Seversk has an area about 10 square kilometers with a pre-war population of 11,000. Russian forces took 41 months to advance roughly 12 kilometers from Lysychansk, east of Seversk, to the western administrative boundary of Seversk. 41 months to advance 12 kilometers. Again, this stuff can happen slowly and then quickly, right? It's entirely possible that happens anywhere along the front. But 12 kilometers in 41 months is a snail's pace, to say the least. They say Russian forces must still advance the 30 kilometers from Seversk to Slovyansk and complete the seizure of Liman before they can begin a direct assault on Slovyansk itself. Liman up here to the north, and this is the area where the 3rd Assault Brigade is currently operating, specifically Chaos Company, the 2nd Mechanized Battalion. So when we're talking about a fundraiser to get those guys thermal drones, this is the area of operations that they're working in. They say the Kremlin has been exaggerating the immediate implications of the seizure of Seversk in attempts to falsely portray Russian forces as imminently threatening the northern part of the fortress belt and making significant simultaneous advances across the theater, such that the front line is imminently collapsing. Again, the front line has been imminently collapsing for going on 4 years at this point, so I'm not sure that I would look at the situation just west of Seversk and decide that this is the one spot where that's actually going to happen. Again, the ISW assessment here is that Liman to the north still has to be dealt with before any sort of real push to the west is viable. But nonetheless, this has been a Russian advance in recent days, an area worth keeping an eye on. Another one, and I'm going to shift over to Suryak map because I think they have a bit of a different view here. Suryak tends to be, Deep State tends to be more aligned with the Ukrainian announcements, more lined up with that. Suryak tends to line up more with the Russian announcements. So in turn, Deep State tends to be viewed as more pro-Ukrainian in their assessments, whereas Suryak tends to be viewed as more pro-Russian. So to give you an idea, this is when we're zooming in down to the west here in the Zaporizhzhia region, Huliapole, this is the Russian assessment as of now. All right, and that's important as we look into a video that just came out that I'll play here. Rybar says Russian soldiers captured the headquarters of the Ukrainian 102nd Brigade. The enemy didn't even manage to turn off their office equipment, and the assault troops seized all documentation in paper and electronic formats. This event most likely occurred about a week ago. So notable, the video came out yesterday. Rybar, a Russian media source, says this likely happened a week ago. Deep State, a Ukrainian source here, says the video shows abandoned flags, a commander's working book, a working map, laptops, smartphones, tablets, flash drives, and stamps. There's no good reason for that to happen. Well, the reason it happens is that a position is quickly overrun and you don't have the ability to, at the very least, destroy that stuff, if not just take it with you. That's awful, to be blunt. Like the fact that all of this was captured, depending on what is there, it definitely has the possibility of posing a significant risk at exposing Ukrainian positions around Huliapole and in that general Zaporizhzhia direction. Deep State continues by saying the state of this command post occurred because it was stormed by the enemy on December 18th. Why there are so many commanders at the command post, including the company commanders, is unknown. One of the company commanders died after the storming because he couldn't be transported to the hospital in time. This video confirms the chaos and problems in the management of territorial defense forces units, which require immediate attention from higher military command for further restructuring, reform, and optimization. This also further confirms the presence of the enemy in the central part of the city, but the situation is such that our forces are now almost everywhere, just like the enemy. Therefore, Huliapole is becoming a large gray zone. Now, back to the map here from Syriac real quick. You'll notice one of the key differences in their mapping is there's no gray area. They have it Ukrainian here to the west, the territory that just looks like it's from Google Maps, and then you have Russian-controlled territory to the east in red. When you look at how, make sure we get to the right area here, we'll go to Huliapole in a one-to-one comparison. Deep State, I actually prefer Deep State for a couple different reasons. One, you can bounce around in the date, but I think more and more this gray zone that is shown on the map is becoming increasingly important. That is where the fighting is taking place. It's not along a very narrow line separating a few buildings in Huliapole. So nonetheless, Russia is saying that they now have almost complete control of the city with their forces at least operating downtown, and we do have some videos of that as well. And a key note here from the Russian assessments, they noted the lack of gunfire and explosions in the background of that command post video, suggesting that the fighting had already moved a pretty significant distance beyond that. Another Russian source here, Colonel Kassad, said the assault units continue their advance in Huliapole. The enemy's measures to stabilize this front sector by deploying reinforcements have failed. The constant work of aviation, artillery, and UAVs on concentrations in the rear prevented the enemy from massing significant forces for a counterattack. It's simply pointless to deny the control over the settlement by our units. The battle for Huliapole, which has become a serious test for our soldiers, is gradually coming to its logical conclusion. Now, we did get some interesting footage just yesterday of Ukrainian GUR head Budanov moving into the Zaporizhzhia region and meeting with some of his soldiers there. They put out a note saying, as part of his work in the Zaporizhzhia sector, the head of the GUR of the Ministry of Defense, Lieutenant General Kirill Budanov, arrived at the forward positions of the Timur Special Unit fighters. The head of the Special Service checked the conditions in which the fighters were working on the ground and awarded some of the soldiers medals for professionalism and courage. Now, what stood out to me there is we're definitely seeing a Russian focus in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Nowhere near what we were seeing up in Pokrovsk, and a bit east in the Seversk Liman direction, but still a concerted effort in Zaporizhzhia, especially right now around Huliapole. Just a couple days ago, the GUR released this footage, kind of additional new video that we hadn't yet seen of the air assault operation, I believe in November, into the northern outskirts of Pokrovsk. And this was at a time where we were starting to get the, most of the Russian assessments that Pokrovsk had fallen. That's a statement they've been making maybe a year back at this point. But we started to hear that all of Pokrovsk was taken. Next thing you know, there's a couple Black Hawk helicopters landing north of Pokrovsk. Of course, Russia said they destroyed everyone on the ground, shot down the helicopters, all that good stuff. And we didn't really have a reason why that took place. In that video, in the explanation of that video, the GUR said that was used to open up a bit of a corridor to allow regular Army units to flow in and reinforce and then evacuate those that were needed. So when we see the GUR conducting operations like that, we need to think about it, setting the conditions for the conventional force to add firepower in a certain direction. So the fact that we see Budanov now popping up in Zaporizhzhia, makes you wonder if there's going to be some sort of similar operation there to try to surge in conventional forces. Now, no doubt, Ukraine has their hands full because these difficult situations like Huliapole are also happening in Seversk, Liman. Kupyansk is still a very serious fight. There's a lot going on up in Sumy. Kharkiv is no joke. There's a lot of areas where Ukraine needs manpower right now. In fact, one of these areas, going back to Deep State map, where it looks like there may have been a Ukrainian counterattack here in recent days, is in the Pokrovsk direction. We're going to view this one with a grain of salt for now because the reports coming in, I wouldn't say are super reliable quite yet and very vague. But there's been a couple different talks of Ukrainian counterattacks in Pokrovsk itself. Wait on that one. But definitely in Rudinsky. So the volume of reports seems to line up here, a town just north of Pokrovsk that's been in the gray area for some time now. Polish analyst Thorkill here put together an assessment talking about this, saying the Ukrainian 1st Corps National Guard Azov was conducting operations in this area and pushed back the Russian 9th Motorized Rifle Brigade, which led to this assault that we saw just a couple days ago. Some added context here. He said on the morning of December 22nd, elements of the recently formed Russian 55th Marine Infantry Division launched a powerful counterattack with a battalion tactical group. He said the mechanized column totaled around 40 total vehicles. In total, the Russians lost about 20 vehicles, including 4 tanks. The scale of the defeat for the Russian 55th Marine Infantry Division was so significant that it provoked negative comments from the Russian mill bloggers. And we went through a number of those in recent videos, where one of them was arguing that the former commander of the 155th Naval Infantry Brigade that got hammered in Volodar and was, we saw them just moving across open terrain with no cover. They've been placed in, they were promoted and elevated, and here they are again in the Pokrovsk direction, sending columns of troops into killing fields. There was an interesting assessment here from the Russian side as well, where they quoted Filatov from the 110th Motorized Rifle Brigade, saying the reason this happened is, quote, the column was cut off from the main forces. No surprise element. There was fog, but it lifted, and the attack plan wasn't changed. And so the Marines pulled people off of their FPV or drone jamming posts, deeming them unnecessary. So what they're getting at is some of these areas, when the fog sets down, it opens the door for attacks. And we've seen that in multiple directions along the front. When Ukraine has the ability to deploy a significant number of thermal drones, it cuts that down a little bit. But nonetheless, foggy conditions do allow for, at the very least, infantry, if not mechanized vehicles, to move forward. In this situation, in the Dopropilya-Pokrovsk direction a couple days ago, where we saw a couple large Russian mechanized assaults, they were trying to utilize that fog cover. The fog lifted, and they continued on. Like, no wonder so many vehicles got destroyed in that mix. Now, stepping back big picture here, we've got another fun little rant from Igor Girkin. So, complicated character here, to say the least. Convicted war criminal, not a good guy. He's very pro-Russian. So this is the guy held responsible for the shooting down of MH17, a civilian airliner. Wants Russia to win. And he's been beating the war drum for a long time. He wants to take all of Ukraine. His biggest gripe is that Russia is not going hard enough. So keep that in mind. He put out a statement through his lawyer, because he is detained for voicing criticism of the Russian military. He said, the situation on the front, I assess it as having significantly deteriorated over the past week. The Ukrainian armed forces launched a strong counterattack in the battle for Kupyansk. That is, the situation is repeating itself, where the enemy slowly retreats on secondary directions, fiercely retaliating at the same time. But where he considers it important, his counterattacks are still extremely dangerous. And the result turned out to be so modest, talking about the overall results for the year now. The results for the year turned out to be so modest for the Russian military that it's unclear whether they brought victory closer or, on the contrary, pushed it away. Now, again, Girkin is kind of a notable doomer. Everything is always heading in the wrong direction for him, but I do think it's interesting here that he calls out the same thing that we're seeing from other analysts, where the key component around Kupyansk specifically is that Ukraine is still able to carry out those counterattacks where they see fit. Now, I got a couple quick videos here to wrap up for you. First is, just a couple weeks ago, we put together a campaign to get some pickup trucks, 4 trucks for 2 different Ukrainian units. The first 2, like as soon as we hit those numbers, they were purchased all put together with EW and painted, and all the armor on the side that was added for the 26th Field Artillery. They sent over a thank you video a couple days ago. Here that is.
Низький уклін та подяка Престон Стюарту і його команді, глядачам його каналу та всім небайдужим людям, які долучилися та зробили свій внесок у придбання автомобіля для нашого підрозділу, який виконує свої обов'язки на Донеччині. Це не просто машина, це порятунок швидкого виконання завдання. Разом до перемоги. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
So there we've got the first vehicle being delivered, the first two being delivered, and two more coming here in a few days. But Car for Ukraine put all this together on the back end. They're the ones that sourced the vehicle, delivered the vehicle, got everything ready, and they put out a nice walkthrough on their YouTube channel. I'll link the full video in the description below, but this is a walkthrough showing those vehicles, and if you pause it at the right time, you might see your name on one of these trucks. Here you go.
And we have two vehicles today that have been fundraised this week by Preston Stewart. We reached out to Preston. We said, hey, Ben, we've got some vehicles in Lviv ready to go. We know you have some requests. Maybe we could do something. And he raised money for 4 trucks within less than a week. Such a crazy community. And I hope, Preston, you'll get your 1 million followers soon. I saw it, the number is close, and I know that might be a cool milestone for you as well. But today, we're starting to deliver the vehicles you helped to raise money for, together with your community. This first one, Mitsubishi L200, as you see, it's armored here, armored over here. Of course, it's not a silver bullet, it's not gonna save from everything, but this is our logic, this is our approach. We try to protect them the way we can, not hurting the car, and then soldiers add additional levels of protection where they see need. They add some radio warfare, they add some nets, etc. This is number 3 in our Christmas tree campaign, and then number 2 of the Christmas tree campaign. So these two beautiful vehicles, also armored over here, yeah, locked, good, here's the key. So massive thanks, Preston, and your amazing community. Such a huge sticker with a lot of names: Sandra, Lawrence, Paul, Volker, Frank, Kim, Paul, and many other great people from Preston's community. This beauty is going, if I'm not mistaken, to 26th Brigade, Artillery Brigade. So it will be quite good timing.
So I always want to share those, the deliveries, the thank yous, and all of that. I try to save them for the end of the video because, you can skip to it then if you want to see that, and maybe not listen to me ramble for the rest of the time here. But either way, thank you so much. It's always incredible and so humbling to see the generosity of all of you and what you're willing to do to support people that you'll likely never meet in person, and how that's having a very real direct impact on the front right now. Now, again, I hope everyone had a wonderful Christmas, had some time with family and friends. I'm going to step away for a little bit here, taking a bit of a break, try to maybe post on some other platforms, some minimal stuff. I've got some interviews lined up, actually, for the next few days here that have been pre-recorded that I'm really excited to share. But I'll be back with these update videos on January 5th. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.